Hi everybody, welcome back to the Academy. On today's episode, I want to talk about something that doesn't seem to get a ton of attention in the Imperial Assault community, and that is the 4-player skirmish mode that was introduced way back in the Return to Hoth expansion. Since then, it's been improved on with the inclusion of better 4-player maps from Jabba's Realm and Heart of the Empire. Adding a 3rd and 4th player is a great way to add a twist to your skirmish games. It introduces multiplayer politics and threat assessment to free-for-all games, and teamwork and cooperation when playing in 2v2 games. Unlike campaign mode, it doesn't single out one player to be the bad guy, and unlike the app campaign, you still get to play against intelligent human opponents as a cooperative team. 4-player skirmish has some peculiar rules differences from regular skirmish, especially for team games. This will be a quick primer on how to play a 4-player skirmish game. You can find the full rules for 4-player skirmish in the PDF rulebooks on FFG's Imperial Assault website, but it can be difficult to fully parse out these rules when they are just in text form, and there are some core rules that interact in strange ways with the 4-player rules. So let's get started. Just a note before we start, hopefully some of you that are watching this video are going to be playing in the Team Skirmish tournament that we are hosting at the Portland Game Store on October 27th, and you know that we are going to have some special house rules for that event. I will be explaining the official FFG rules for 4-player skirmish in this video, but I will also be noting the special exceptions to those rules that we will be using for that event, so just be aware of that as you're watching. 4-player skirmish is played either as a free-for-all game in which every player is out for themselves and trying to be the first to score 40 victory points, or as a team game in which teams of 2 players battle on a larger than normal skirmish map. Before play begins, each player will build a 40-point army and 15-card command deck just as normal. Under the default rules, there are no added restrictions on list building for free-for-all and team games, and normal restrictions apply to each player's individual list. So you can have Rebels teamed up with Empire, you can have a team with 2 Luke Skywalkers, 2 Darth Vaders, etc., so long as they're in separate lists. You could even play the exact same list as your teammate, as boring as that sounds. If you're playing with our special event rules, you'll have to play the same faction as your teammate and can't have any duplicates of unique figures or upgrades between both lists. We're hoping this will inspire more interesting list building for this event. When playing a free-for-all, the first player to score 40 victory points is declared the winner. In Team Skirmish, the first team to score 60 victory points is the winner. If all of a player's figures are defeated before the game is over, that player is eliminated from the game and cannot use effects from their skirmish upgrades or command cards. When playing in a free-for-all game, all of the other players are your opponents and all of their figures are hostile figures. In a team game, your teammates' figures are considered to be friendly figures. This has 2 important rules interactions that aren't immediately obvious. First, it means that under the official FFG rules, you can play command cards on your teammates' figures as if they were your own. So, for example, you could play your Son of Skywalker card on your teammate's Luke Skywalker, even if they already played Son of Skywalker this round. And remember that you're not required to have a figure in your list to play its unique command card, so you can include Son of Skywalker in your Imperial command deck if you're teaming up with a Luke Skywalker player, or both teammates could play their copy of Assassinate during the same attack. Ow. Note that for upcoming event, we will be using a house rule that players will only be allowed to play command cards on their own figures, though you can still target any friendly figure with cards that specifically mention friendly figure in the text box, such as Call the Vanguard or Inspiring Speech. The other odd rules interaction of your teammates' figures being friendly is with controlling objects. Basically, if your teammate controls an object like a terminal or objective, you are counted as controlling that object too. So if your teammate controls a terminal, you get to draw an extra command card for that terminal, and if both teammates each control a terminal, they will be drawing 2 extra command cards each turn. This is something that a lot of players miss when they play 4-player skirmish, including myself when I first tried the format. Note that some mission rules like Nal Hutta Borderlands will only count objects that you control as a team, in which case you don't double the effects for each player. But it's been confirmed that on the Temple Gardens map from Heart of the Empire, because victory points are awarded to each individual player for each objective they control, teams will effectively be scoring double the amount of victory points for each objective that their team controls. An important thing to keep in mind when playing free-for-all is that the last player to cause damage to a figure scores the victory points for defeating that figure, and if a player defeats the last figure in a group, they get the victory points from any attachments that were on that group. If the final damage dealt to a figure wasn't caused by an opponent, such as a Probe Droid Self-Destruct, Onar's Rush, or Hera's Evacuate card, the player that owns that figure chooses an opponent to score the victory points from that defeated figure. One other weird interaction with 4-player team battle rules that has recently popped up with the release of Tyrants of Lothal expansion is the Specter Cell upgrade card. This card requires that your army only have members of Specter Cell in it, but once it's been included in your list, its effects work on any friendly figure, not just friendly Specter Cell members. So a Specter Cell army in team battle could be giving all those extra damage and block bonuses to IG-88 and his merry band of hunters, and even giving them free movement and attacks. I personally find this interaction to be very troubling and unbalancing to the spirit of Team Skirmish, so for those playing in our upcoming tournament, know that the bonuses from Specter Cell will be limited to only affecting friendly Specter Cell figures and Chopper. Okay, so now that we've gone over the easy stuff, let's get into the more complicated aspects of 4-player skirmish using some helpful diagrams for setup, deployment, and activation order. When setting up for 4-player skirmish, the first thing that needs to happen is seeding, which can be done before or after a map has been selected and built. In a free-for-all game, where you sit at the table doesn't really matter and ideally should be randomized. If you're playing a team game, then you need to sit across from your partner, not next to them, though you are still allowed to strategize with your teammate and share hidden information with them as much as you like. Your two opponents will be seated on your immediate left and right. Once players have found their seats, determine which player will start the game with initiative. If one player has the lowest army point total or devious scheme upgrade in their list, they get to decide which player starts with initiative. Otherwise, use a random method to determine which player will start with initiative. I personally prefer the method of shuffling 3 regular Stormtroopers cards and an Elite Stormtrooper card and handing them out to the 4 players face down, but any sufficiently random method will work. Note that Devious Scheme will have no effect if more than one player has included it in their list. Now that we know who has initiative, we can know the initiative order, which is basically just the order that players activate and play their cards. Starting with the player with initiative and going left around the table in a clockwise order. When players have abilities that would be played during the same timing window, those abilities will be played in initiative order, starting with the player with initiative and then going left around the table. For example, if player 2 and player 4 both have end of round effects, player 2 will get to use theirs first and then player 4. Once players have found their seats and set up the map, it's time to choose deployment zones. The player with initiative gets to choose their deployment zone first, then each player chooses a deployment zone for themselves in initiative order. Remember, players aren't required to choose the zone that's in front of them. After everyone has selected a deployment zone, you can rotate the map in such a way that makes it easier for everyone, but you shouldn't change where players are sitting in relation to each other. In our example here, player 1 has initiative and has heard a rumor on the internet that the yellow zone on this map is particularly strong, so he chooses that, even though it's across from him. Then player 2 on his left gets to choose a deployment zone and decides to keep her distance from player 1 and chooses the green deployment zone. Then player 3 chooses the blue deployment zone and player 4 is left with the red deployment zone. As you can see, the end result isn't always going to have each player sitting next to their deployment zone, so you may need to ask for help from your teammate when deploying and activating figures, or just stand up and reach over the table or move around the table. Players then draw their hand of 3 command cards and play begins. The player with initiative activates first, followed by the players to their left. At the very end of each round, the player with initiative will pass the initiative token to the player on their left, in this case from player 1 to player 2. So now player 2 will be activating first, and player 1 will be activating last. So what happens when a player plays Take Initiative? Instead of moving the initiative token like you would in normal skirmish, instead the player with initiative will keep the initiative token, and the player that played Take Initiative will get to effectively interrupt the normal activation order in order to take the first activation for the round. Note that they don't lose their normal activation for the round, they will still get to activate in normal initiative order in addition to their first activation. So in this case, player 3 is playing Take Initiative, so the activation order will now look like this, with player 3 activating first, and then activation order proceeding normally with player 2 activating next, player 3 activating again in their normal order, then players 4 and 1 activating. It is actually possible for multiple players to play Take Initiative in 4-player skirmish. If that happens, then each player who played Take Initiative will get to activate before everyone else, and they will take those activations in initiative order. So after player 3 plays Take Initiative, player 4 also plays Take Initiative. The turn order will now look like this, with player 3 activating first, then player 4, and then proceeding through the normal activation order for the rest of the round, with poor player 1 having to wait through 5 activations before getting to activate. This makes Take Initiative especially powerful in 4-player skirmish, as it effectively gives you a bonus activation. Note that the player that already has the initiative token is not allowed to play Take Initiative that round. So that's pretty much everything you need to know to get started with 4-player skirmish. Like I said, it's a really fun format that can be a breath of fresh air if all you've ever played is campaign, skirmish, or co-op. And it allows for a lot of new and interesting strategies, and also does a lot to expand the scale of normal skirmish games. It's so awesome to see twice the number of figures on the table than you'd normally see in a game. Team skirmish is also a great way for new players to learn from more experienced players without being bludgeoned by them, and for family members or couples to play the game together as a team. If you want to know more about the house rules we're using for our team battle tournament, you can click on the Google Doc link in the description. And if you live in the Pacific Northwest and are interested in playing some team skirmish with a buddy, bring them down to the Portland Game Store on October 27th at noon, and we'd love to have you there. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.